Hey, what's up, lovely people? We are back for part 2 of my in-depth series on drum synthesis. In the previous video, we talked a lot about going super in-depth on everything you need to synthesize and process a kick drum sound. And if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend that you go watch it right now. You can find it here because a lot of what we're going to do today is going to be similar to that video, and I'll be offering a little bit less explanation so that I don't have to take too much of your time. And again, the goal today is to create not necessarily the perfect snare, but to go through a really comprehensive method and processing chain to give you full and unlimited control over the creation of your snare. What we're going to do is we're going to try and understand what a snare drum sound really is, what all the different sources of sound are that come from the actual physical snare drum, and then we're going to program those in Serum and in Ableton in a way that makes it possible for you to adjust every single little thing that you want about the sound. And we're going to consolidate a lot of findings and knowledge and options into processes. For this, we will be using some devices that I created in Ableton. Those are available for a free download here below, but I recommend that you watch the tutorial and you actually create something like it yourself rather than downloading it, because being involved in the process increases your understanding significantly. This is scientifically proven. All right, last but not least, I do want to say that making a snare is much more of an art than making a kick, and there will be many opinions of things that one might want to add to what we're doing today. And the point of today is not to be perfect. The point of today is to provide you with extreme control, and I think that's what we're gonna do really nicely. Okay, we are back in Ableton, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna run first really quickly through what we're gonna create, which I've already created here in this snare group here, and then we're going to recreate that here. Now, if we look at what a snare drum actually is, just like we looked at the kick drum in the previous video, it's very similar. It's a film, probably made out of cowhide or some synthetic material, that's going to vibrate over a metal and wooden frame. And so we're going to get very similar elements to what we would get in a kick drum, which is we're going to have the vibration of that skin or synthetic material, although it's going to be at a higher frequency than in the case of the kick drum, because that is much bigger and there's more air in the actual thing, and this is much smaller. And what that also means is we're going to get a lot more noise because we have a lot more metal here going on. That's going to make a lot more part of the sound. And what you also see is that you have a lot of these things here on the side that are probably going to ring a little bit as you hit it, and that's also what's going to create the noise in the sound. So just like a kick drum, we're going to get a transient made out of noise. We're going to get a base of the sound that's made out of the vibration of this cowhide that's gonna go from like a really high-pitched vibration really quickly down to a lower-pitched vibration, and we're going to have a pretty significant noise tail caused by all this metal that's around this item. Now, another thing worth mentioning is that in drum and bass, and in some other genres as well, snares aren't always just snares. They often get layered with claps, which have a similar timbre to the noise that a snare would make by itself, and sometimes they're even layered with something like cymbals. So we're going to have a look at that today as well. So when we go back to Ableton, let's see what our finished end product is going to look like. We have this snare group here. Then we have the actual snare, which has a couple of layers that you can see here. Just like the kick drum in the previous video, it has a body, it has noise, it has a layer for a clap, just like we talked about just now, and it has a layer for acoustic, which usually is used to take acoustic snare and then use some of the timbre from that to add onto it as well. We'll dive into that too. And then also we have this parallel channel where we're going to partially compress or parallel compress part of the snare sound to make it more aggressive in a way and more full. And so what you will see if you just scroll through this, we're going to build a lot of control centers, what I like to call them here, that are going to shape how our sound sounds. And it looks probably pretty intimidating, but actually it's all going to flow from a very logical workflow of what we know about kicks and snares and what makes them sound good, and what we know about all the different sources of sound. So for example, that rim shot sound, the noise sound, the sound of the wood on the actual cowhide, it's all going to flow very logically from there. So without further ado, let's start recreating what we've got here, which sounds like this. Quite basic, but I would say a very solid snare. All right, so let's scroll down to our completely empty group where we have no processing, nothing else going on yet, and let's call this channel the bass and this channel the parallel. And let's grab Serum. Once again, you can use whatever you want to use, really. All you need is something that can oscillate noise and that can oscillate a basic sine wave. So we're going to use Serum for that. We're going to drag an instance of Serum to this bass here, and we're going to go into the basic shapes again. We're going to get this octave down 1, and then we're going to insert some MIDI notes here, right on the place where a snare drum should be. And so what is definitely worth mentioning is that you want to pick the right note here. For example, I'm using G3 now because we want the snare to hit at about 200 hertz. That's commonly where drum and bass snares sit. You could go higher, you could go lower, but if you look at a lot of songs, and also the very famous artist Metric wrote a post on it once and did a whole video about it, a lot of the snares in drum and bass, they sit around 200 hertz. So we want our bass sound also be around 200 hertz, and we can achieve that either by getting the right note here, or as we'll see later, you can change that note with a pitch function here, which is not what we're going to do today, but you could also do that and just change the semitones. And what you're looking for, just if we grab an EQ really quickly and we expand this, we're looking for something to hit this 200 hertz mark here. And if you were to, for example, use this pitch shifter, you could shift that up, and you'll see that it starts hitting at different points. And the same thing happens if you change the notes up or down, it starts hitting at a different point. So right now we are at the G note, and that's fine. We're hitting exactly on that 200 hertz here, which is great. Okay, so back into Serum, we are going to do some very similar things to creating a kick drum. First, we're going to grab this LFO. We're going to apply it to the level here because we want to control that. And once again, you could use an envelope for this. I just find that an LFO gives you a little bit more control. We're going to add a dot here, and we're going to probably let it sustain a little bit until past this first little line here. And then we're going to go make it down pretty quickly. So there, so we just have a dunk. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to influence the chorus pitch again. Just like a kick drum, the hide on the actual drum is going to vibrate really quickly first and then slower, which means that the frequency at which it oscillates changes downward. And that's what we want to emulate here with this LFO, which we are going to apply to the chorus pitch. And first of all, you want to go into the matrix and make this unipolar instead of going two ways. And then I think we want to put this, let's say, around like maybe 12 semitones. I think that would be good. We can even make this a little bit faster by just introducing another dot here and changing the slope of this. That sounds about good for now. All right, then next we want to introduce a transient, which we're going to do with the noise here. So we're going to make a similar shape in LFO3, and we're just going to apply it to the level of the noise. And you can already hear that we're getting a nice little transient out there. We don't necessarily have to pick this noise. We can choose all kinds of noise. So we could go for this one, or yeah, let's pick the ARP circuit actually and up the pitch a little bit. And then one thing you might want to do is you might want to put a high pass here on this filter and, you know, just filter out anything that past that 200 hertz transient of our sine wave here so that we don't get any issue. And then take it away from the oscillator A and put it on the noise, just so we don't get any frequency trouble, any phasing or whatever. And we can even turn the drive of this up a little bit so we get a more stronger click here. All right, so then last we could add some distortion already here. Let's get this tube distortion up a little bit. Maybe not that much. Okay, and then we can click this mix knob here to reveal the level knob and turn that up too. Let's work with that for now. I think we've got a nice solid bass here. So then what we want to go and do is we want to go and group this. So you can go Control or Command G. We can make a group out of this, and we can click this button here to reveal the channels. And we're just going to add another channel here with another instance of Serum. And in this Serum, we're going to create the noise. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this the body, and we're going to call this the noise. And we're going to deactivate the oscillator here. We're going to activate the noise oscillator here. And let's pick like something like bright white. We want some randomized noise. By the way, something you might want to do here, all the noise sounds in Serum are mono, but it could be nice to add stereo noise either in the transient or in this noise layer that we're going to create here. And so you can actually go and get stereo noise samples from Splice or wherever, and you can drag them in here so you can use them like that. Or you can record some noise here and then bounce it out to audio twice, put one channel like normally and the other channel you reverse the sound, and then you record them both in a new channel, and then you'll actually have stereo noise. But for now, we're going to use this bright white, and we're going to introduce this filter again. We're going to get this high filter on the noise with the cutoff somewhere here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the body here, and we're going to check where our initial bass sound is hitting in terms of volume. So it's playing from the very start, so from the immediate attack to about a little bit before the second line here, if you can see that in your own Serum or on this screen. And so what we want is we want the noise to hit later than that. That's what happens in an actual snare drum. So we're going to shape the LFO that we're going to apply to the level of this noise. We're going to shape it so that it actually only kicks in after, let's also put this on envelope mode. It kicks in sort of after the beginning of that other sound. So we want to glue them together. The bass sound kind of is until here, and slightly before that ends, that's when we're going to introduce the noise. So just really quickly, that sounds like this. I would say that probably can clean up that noise tail a little bit. So maybe we put it like this. But we can play with that later. For now, I think it's fine. All right, so we've got a relatively decent bass now. Of course, we want to do a bunch of post-processing to make it sound better. So one thing that we can do already to make this noise a little bit more interesting, or just the top end, is we can add an erosion. So let's drag this in here really quickly, because we only really want to see this EQ8 for the body in case we want to change the frequency at which it hits. And the beautiful thing, by the way, of putting everything in an instrument rack like this is we can add post-processing chains on the individual oscillators or sources of sound that only affect that part. And then we can add, after that, stuff that affects everything. So we've got like an all-in-one machine going here. So this erosion, we're going to add it to what hits everything. And what I want to do is I want to use some wide noise, or you could also just use some noise, and sort of saturate this top area here. Maybe make it a little bit wider. Give it a little bit more splash, sort of. We're going to leave that there for now, but we can change the timbre of this later. And then another thing that you could do is you could introduce a multi-band dynamic and just accentuate that top, that tail more. So we're going to drag this here. And then if you click and you go up or down with your cursor, so you hold it clicked, you can do this. And I'll show you what it does to the sound. So we're going to play it. So just going to drag out that tail a bit more. Now there it's adding like a hi-hatty sound. We don't want that. But this could be nice. Let's see how we do. And let's group these together, because we want to kind of remember what the intent is for this, and we're going to call it timbre control, because it's going to affect sort of everything that's above the fundamental. So let's get a little bit more out of the sound. Let's get a glue compressor, because we've got multiple layers, and we kind of want to glue them together a little bit more. And let's set the threshold at like -24, and the makeup quite high, and let's see how we do. And because we don't want to compress the transient here, we want the attack to be 10 or 30 milliseconds. I like 30 here, and the release to be quite short. And the ratio, you can just play around with, see what sounds best. So yeah, let's see how that sounds. Let's put on the soft clip. Hey, so really quickly, if you are enjoying this tutorial, then I might have something that you are interested in. Very soon, not too long from now, I'm going to be releasing a course that is completely follow along from start to finish, from ideation all the way to creation, all the way to mixing and mastering a professional drum and bass track. So if you like following along with me in these videos and really going in depth, and you want more of that, then what you can do right now is you can go to the link in the description and you can register your interest for when this course comes out. If that sounds like something that you might be interested in, then you can go to the link in the description and tell me that you're interested. Leave your email, and what I'll do is I'll give you a 50% discount as soon as it comes out. All right, end of transmission. Let's go back to the video. Okay, for the next step, what we saw in the kick video is that I used this aggregation of EQs to sort of sculpt the sound on the frequencies of which we know that the kick sort of gains its extra oomph or its extra boom or whatever. And we can do the same thing for a snare. A snare has a couple of points that make or break the sound depending on how the sound needs to be and what kind of vibe it needs to have. And so we're going to add this device that I built, which is lovingly called the Frequency Control Center for the snare. And it's very similar to what we were doing to the kick in the other video. Yeah, we're going to just accentuate, or not accentuate, a bunch of frequencies that make a difference to the sound. So what have we got here? We've got this mid frequency. This is around 1.5K, and this is an area actually that sort of dance floor-y producers seem to accentuate now. And it adds a very mid-level character to a snare that you hear a lot in sort of that more powerful metric and dimension and subfocus sort of dance floor. So we've got a notch here that we're just capable of putting up or down. It's this top one just here, and we can turn it on or off. We can use all these knobs to change the gain or to change the frequency. And the reason that I introduced these buttons and that I don't want to drag around this thing with hand is just to protect yourself, because when you can only move one knob at a time, you're more conscious of what you're doing and you're keeping the template intact. It prevents you from EQing something for 4 hours and then just fucking giving up on life and just rage quitting. So we've got this frequency here that we can turn on and off. Then we've got the thump of the snare, which is essentially just taking that 200 hertz, so where that fundamental hits, and adding a boost there, which also makes a significant change to how hard that fundamental hits in comparison to the sound, and that also determines the aggressiveness or maybe the mellowness of the snare. And then, of course, we can control the low cut here because we want to remove some frequencies, and we can introduce a high shelf or high gain, just like with the kick, in case we want to take out some of those highs. Now, one thing that's worth noticing is there's also a high roll-off frequency button here, and essentially what that does is you can choose to use a high shelf, but sometimes when the snare is not the most important top element, you want to choose the element that wins. So if you have a very hi-hat or top loop, or just generally speaking high frequency intensive track, then you might want to roll off some of these frequencies here to give space to those energetic top elements. So that's another option that we have here. So we can just kind of roll this back and forth to see where does our snare need to sit in the mix in terms of high frequencies. So that's something to play with as well. If you look at lots of snare samples on Splice, they end somewhere around here, so they shave a little bit off of the top. And then the other thing that you have is what I've dubbed the slap frequency, and it's adding something around 7.2 hertz. You can go a little bit lower, a little bit later, just you can hear that out, and that just adds a little bit more of a slappy feeling, like getting slapped in the face, that sort of top end aggressive splash. So let's just solo the sound with everything off and then see how these affect the sound. So let's take the highs off a little bit. Introduce the thump. Introduce the mid. And then introduce some slap. If I take everything off, versus, that sounds a lot nicer. But of course, you don't have to use all of these. You can add them to flavor. It's options that you have in this total package of control. We can also add some high shelf, of course. It is really up to you. All right, so that's what we want to accentuate. But then there's also some frequencies within the snare that can be problematic. And ones that are more commonly known to be a little bit problematic are around sort of the 300 hertz area and the 500 hertz area. They cause boxiness. And then sort of in the higher areas, there's some areas that can be problematic when you have more acoustic snares that some people refer to as the ping. And you could also use an EQ to take those out. So I've also aggregated all of that knowledge into these other two devices. And by the way, all of the devices that we're going to talk about that are integrated Ableton devices that I've built, you can download for free with a link in the description. So go check that out. So one of these devices here is, I've called it the box/hardness control center. And all it really does is we have box 1 and box 2 is what I've called, and they're around 300 hertz and 500 hertz, and they just take away in very narrow notches some of these frequencies. So without it, it sounds like this, and with it, it sounds like this. I think that now, because we've synthesized everything, it doesn't do that much, but when we're going to add an acoustic layer or a clap layer later or something else, it's definitely going to help to take out some of that, what they call boxiness. Once again, just an option you have to choose to improve your sound or not. And then, yeah, lastly, we have this acoustic / ping hardness control. There's just two areas that could potentially be problematic for this pinging or these higher ringing frequencies. This is not an exact science, but in general, it's nice to have two more notches to play with, sort of to sculpt out the sound and take out some problematic frequencies. So you can just take these frequency knobs and just kind of turn them around. For now, I don't think it's necessary, but you can also just get this and download it in the link below if you want to give it a spin. But let's deactivate that for now. So what we've got now is... sounds pretty good so far. So let's start adding some things to the snare group. We haven't built the parallel part yet, but this is going to affect both of those things. So what I like to do is to just group together two more EQs on the group. One of them to accentuate just one more frequency, because what you'll notice is that once you've sort of finished your snare, you might want to play around with how exactly the sound hits you. So you can drag this back and forth and sort of more determine the final sound of your snare and have a little bit more editorial control over the final product. And you could add another EQ here sort of to remove boxiness once again, sort of as the final product, but I don't think it's necessary today. And so what else we want to add to the group that's going to really contribute to the sound is a convolution reverb. We talked about it already in the video about the kick, but convolution reverbs give an impulse response which treat a sound specifically as if it were played through some particular area, material, or other type of physical thing. And the beautiful thing about Ableton's convolution reverb is it has here, when you go to type, it has these made for drums. And there's actually a couple that are specifically for snares. So you can scroll through and see what sounds good. But I found that the BM7 snare plate B is a really nice realness to the snare. So let's bring down the dry and wet a little bit, maybe to like 16% or something like that. And we can take the size down a bit and we can take the decay down a bit. And let's see what that does to our sound. So without it, it sounds like this. But when we add it, it sounds like this. And then we probably want to take out some of these highs of the reverb and take out some of these lows, just make it a little bit cleaner. But that adds a really nice extra timbre and extra sort of real feel to the snare, I feel. And it's nice because it's going to do that to the group, so also to the part that we're going to parallel process. And so right now we are here. I think we're going to go back and change a few things to make it sound a little bit more reeled in. So one thing that we can definitely do is we can go back into the bass layer here, and we can tame the volume of this body a little bit. I think that sounds probably pretty good. And I think to avoid some clipping, we're going to bring this down like maybe like 12 decibels or something. And I want to maybe take this noise layer and give that some more volume. So let's add an extra utility so that we have more control, because we can only add 6 dB here. So let's include that in the noise tail here, and let's add some volume. Maybe take the body back up. So another thing that we might want to do is we might want to layer a clap in here to give some extra character to the high end. So what we're going to do is we are going to add a simpler to the mix, and we are going to call that the clap. And we're going to add another thing. I think we want to add the option to add an acoustic snare also, so we can borrow a little bit of timbre from another really cool snare that we might like. So we're going to add another simpler in here that we are going to call the acoustic. And so let's find a clap sample for this. I found this clap sample from I think it's Shock One's pack on Splice that sounds like this just by itself. It's worth noting that because we are playing these MIDI notes for the fundamental at a little bit higher note, we probably want to pitch this down, because without it, it sounds like this. That's too pitched up. So let's take it a pitch and pitch it 12 semitones down so that we get more of a traditional clap sound. And then, of course, what we want to do is we want to low pass this. So we're going to grab an EQ8 so that just with the noise, we're only getting the top end of it and the character that comes after that fundamental. So anything upwards of like, I don't know, 250 hertz or something like that. Right. And then we can do the same thing with an acoustic snare. In this same pack, I found a snare, which we're also, for the same reason, going to pitch down by 12 semitones. That sounds just like this. And we're just going to copy this same EQ8 here, and we're going to add it also here to this acoustic. So just double click here and Control V, so that we can borrow the top timbre of that clap and this acoustic snare if we wanted to. If we wanted to. We don't have to, but let's see. So together it would sound like this. Okay, that is definitely way too noisy, so I think I'm going to take out this acoustic snare. And then we're probably going to go back in a minute and make some changes to the relationship between the fundamental and the noise. But for now, we can start working on some parallel compression, I think. So let's grab all of this, select all, we're going to copy it, and we're going to go to this parallel channel here. So what we're going to do is we're going to introduce another EQ8, and we're going to low pass everything until somewhere after that fundamental again, because what we want to do is we want to compress all the top energy and just make that loud, like super loud, so that we can pack a lot more punch into the snare. That's what we're gonna do here. We've low passed everything, and then we're going to add a compressor. And just like with the glue compressor, well, we're going to up the ratio a lot, and we're going to let the attack be quite long, because we want that initial transient to definitely hit. So let's experiment with that a little bit. Press this makeup button here. Let's start getting this line down here. There's no fundamental in there now. But maybe we take out these pitches here. There, that's a nice slap. Reel this in a bit. Let's see what that sounds like together. Maybe not quite as much. Starting to sound nice. We can bring the body up a little bit. Add a utility here to this body. We can play around with the volume of that a little bit more. Sort of increase the aggressiveness. I like that. That's slappy. Of course, it's clipping, so we have to take these layers down in the mix a little bit. So let's like do Lex minus 0.6 and then minus 10 maybe. And just like that, I feel like we've built quite a nice snare. Now, it's hard to say whether it's nice because it's not in the context of a song, but the beautiful thing is because we've built so much control into our snares and the rest of our drums, we can start out with whatever sounds acceptable and then make the track. And as the track gets to the stage where we need to adjust the drums, we literally have all the knobs to turn it into what we need it to be. We can change the tail, we can change the noise, we can change the timbre of the noise, we can change the pitch of the noise. We have all these individual parts that we have full control over, meaning the creative possibilities are endless. But not only that, it's going to give you a lot of confidence that you can get your track the way that you want, because you don't have to feel helpless because you're at the mercy of some sample. All right, well, that was a lot, but I think we got through it. That was the video. So yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something. Let me know in the comments below if you learned something and what was the most valuable thing. And also let me know if you have anything to share, because people here are trying to learn drum and bass and they also want to hear what you're doing. So without further ado, thank you for watching once again, and I might see you in another video.